For more on this, let's go to our headliner, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House and Fox News contributor. Speaker, thank you for coming on this morning. What do you make of the president's handling of this situation with Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think he's in a difficult situation because the Iranians, for example, would love for us to separate ourselves from Saudi Arabia. But the Israelis and others all realize that this is a very, very important ally of ours. I think step one is exactly what Secretary Pompeo is doing. We've got to get to the bottom of this. And frankly, if it does turn out to be somebody very close to the Crown Prince, I think the Crown Prince is going to be in very substantial trouble. That doesn't mean that we're going to break relations with Saudi Arabia, but it does mean we're going to find ways to take steps to communicate very intensely that we just don't accept this. We don't accept it when the Russians poison people in Britain, and we would not accept it if the Saudis have killed a journalist in Turkey. So I do think step one is to get the facts. I think they're working at it, and I think that Secretary Pompeo got a pretty strong pledge. We'll see if the Saudis follow through.
And we'll see what Pompeo says when he comes back. Let's talk about midterms right now, 20 days away. I mean, what is your sense right now when there's a piece out there about Republicans getting their getting pretty taken on the money side? There's some other stories that counter and say that the RNC is doing just fine. I mean, where do you see at the moment us going on November 7th, let's say?
Well, Bill, let me just warn that all of the so-called experts on television who were wrong in 2016 are back this year as confident as they were when they were totally wrong in 2016. Nancy Pelosi yesterday gave the Republicans the greatest gift she could have given them. Her quotes at Harvard, in which she explained you don't really need borders, that after all you ought to be friends with everyone, and that wanting to have a wall is just a macho thing. That is as clear a statement of the insanity of the open borders Democratic Party as we could possibly get. And when combined with Senator Feinstein, both of them, of course, from San Francisco, having introduced a bill in the Senate for open borders, supported, by the way, co-sponsored by every single Democrat in the Senate, I think if that's our choice, I think that we have a...
I think you're hearing something else.
I think we have a very real chance here.
Yeah, I think you're hearing something else in your ear.
I wondered for a half second what that was all about. But let me just say, if the Republicans double down and focus on Kevin McCarthy's bill to bring up in December that would allow us to control the border, and compare that with the Pelosi-Feinstein position of totally open borders at a time when you have a caravan of thousands of people coming out of Central America. And then the American citizens can decide. You want sanctuary cities, you want MS-13, you want fentanyl and opioids, you want literally an unending flood of immigrants from all over the planet, vote Democrat. And on the other hand, if you think America has the right to control its border, vote Republican.
It sounds like that is the issue the president is pushing at this moment, considering the last two tweets from him have been on that, talking about those caravans, saying Democrats won't approve legislation that allows laws for the protection of our country. Great midterm issue for Republicans, he says. And moments ago, he says Republicans must make the horrendous, weak and outdated immigration laws and the border a part of the midterms. This looks like the latest push.
Look, I think that's exactly right. When you say to the average American, we have a Democratic candidate for governor, Stacey Abrams in Georgia, who basically would make all of Georgia a sanctuary state. You have the candidate for governor in California, Gavin Newsom, Democrat, who has said he wants to have universal health care paid by the government, and he wants it to apply to illegal immigrants. Well, that would make California the magnet for the planet. If you have a sickness, move to California and they'll take care of you. I mean, this is a core choice. Is America a country that has the right to protect itself and to define who comes in? Or is America now going to be just an open system where everybody on the planet can come here? That's how big the choice is going to be by Election Day, and I think the Democrats will lose that debate by a huge margin.
Well, let's go to Trish Regan's interview with the president last night, debut of her new show, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, prime time on Fox Business. Here's the soundbite from the president, then I want to get to an AP quote as well. Watch.
I think we're going to do really well, and I I don't want to make predictions, but we have great poll numbers. We have tremendous turnout at these rallies, thousands and thousands of people, more than we can hold. There's enthusiasm like we had at, in the last election, 2016, which was quite a spectacular day and evening. I think we have a lot of enthusiasm. I keep hearing about the enthusiasm, the blue wave, but I think we have tremendous enthusiasm.
He's packing them in two at these rallies, going to be in Montana again this week, Nevada and Arizona. If Democrats win the House, if Nancy Pelosi is Speaker, how much have you stopped to consider how this president would work with Democratic leadership in the House? What would that look like?
How do you work with a person who says she wants to impeach you, who despises everything you stand for, and who represents a San Francisco hard left worldview in a party which is becoming the Socialist Party of America?
Is that gridlock?
I think it would be a very contentious. Well, I think on the House side, I think the Senate side, the Republicans are going to gain Senate seats. And I want to be clear. I think that Kevin McCarthy's bill is a really important step in the right direction to control our borders. I think that the odds are increasingly good. The Republicans will keep their majority in the House. And I went through this in 2016. I was on a show 2 weeks to the day before, and somebody said to me, well, if you lose the Senate and you lose the presidency, did you pick the wrong guy? And I said, we're 2 weeks out, and you're assuming. So I would say right now that on the issues, Republicans have a chance to have a historic election night, keep the House, increase the Senate, and have the left be totally shocked.
Well, the president's already preparing for if the Republicans do lose the House. He says it won't be on me. Here he is in an AP interview. Oh, I'm sorry. It's a quote. Here's what he says on that. It's a tough year. The midterms are tough for everybody opposite of president. For whatever reason, nobody has been able to say. And the AP then asked the question, if Republicans were to lose control of the House or a couple of days later, depending on how long it takes to count the votes, do you believe you bear some responsibility for that? The president says, no, I think I'm helping people. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, the president came out and pointed out that the AP headline was totally wrong and misleading. I think what he said is exactly right. I don't remember any president who has campaigned harder, and I think he's adding more rallies by the day. Yeah. I think he'll have gotten maybe to 50 rallies by the time of the election. So he's doing his job. He's also raised a tremendous amount of money, so he's doing his job. And now the candidates have to go out and do their jobs. And I think it's fair for him to say, this is not purely a referendum on Trump, but also I would say the premise is wrong. I would not concede losing the House for 1 minute. I think that we have the issues on our side: jobs versus mobs, results versus the resistance, conservative judges versus radicals, and controlling the border versus open borders. I think this is going to be a very surprising election night.
Yeah. He went on the tweet about that, and just
by the way, at that point, if we keep the House, does the New York Times have to say that Trump won?
Guess so. Stand by for that. Here is this tweet. AP headline was very different from my quote and meaning in the story. They just can't help themselves. Fake news. You mentioned a Trump referendum. How much do you think it really is all about him?
I think less than people would have expected 2 months ago. I think that the issues are increasingly important. The country understands, in the Kavanaugh fight and the way in which Judge Kavanaugh, now Justice Kavanaugh, was lied about, smeared, had character assassination, the childish behavior of the Democratic senators, the imagery of left-wing radicals literally scratching at the door of the Supreme Court. I think all of that has galvanized the country. Excuse me, and actually made the issue much bigger than just Donald Trump. And I mean, as big as Donald Trump is, I think the issue really is which kind of America do you want? And I was just in Seattle and Dallas and Des Moines, and I can tell you, people were worried about the country. They just weren't worried about the president. And they were more fired up than I ever remember seeing them.
Interesting. Sir, thank you for your time. Come on back real soon, okay? We got 20 days here, okay?
Alrighty.
Final sprint. Newt Gingrich, thank you.